His family had always worked on the land, and he'd seen droughts and blights affect the crops, seen wages rise and fall. His own father had been killed some 10 years back when workers rioted over their paltry pay. Daily he told Annie, "Things will get better, you'll see." She hoped he was right, knew deep down that he wasn't. They were approaching the hungry gap, that time of year when winter's crops were all but finished and summer's crops were still to come. Without a store of preserved food, times were only going to get harder for them. Over the last few weeks, she'd tried to persuade him to move away, to one of the towns or cities where there'd be more work and more money to be made. But Jake wasn't interested. "Hailbury's my home, Annie B. You're home now too. Why would we go anywhere else?" And he would smile and draw her in for a kiss. They'd been married 2 years now, the happiest 2 years of her life, despite the hardship of the past few months. Annie could still remember the exact moment when she'd first seen him. They had looked at each other, and it was as though there was a sort of spark, the striking of flint on steel, and a feeling that she already knew him and had always known him. When he smiled and gave her a wink with those sweet blue eyes, that was it. She was his. It had been Shrovetide, an unseasonably warm day, a football match between the two villages of Leybourne and Hailbury. The innkeeper of the Bell and the Bottle, which stood between the two villages, had offered an enormous wheel of cheese and a barrel of beer as the prize for whichever village could get the first ball through the church gates of the opposing village. Annie could remember the feverish atmosphere, the shouting and cheering, the men, women and children all careering up and down the lanes after the battered leather ball. She'd been with a few friends from her village when they'd run into Jake and some other lads from Hailbury, their enemy. She'd spotted his mischievous smile straight away, his dark hair the colour and texture of a jackdaw's feathers. The ball had soared through the air, and they'd all grappled for it, breathless with laughter. She could still recall the disconcerting, delightful lurch of her stomach when Jake put his arms around her and lifted her up into the air to keep her away from the ball. She had kicked him in the shins, she remembered, but he just held her tight, and when he put her gently down, they had stood in the middle of the street, gazing at one another. The game of football moved on, but the two of them had remained behind, eyes locked. They'd been inseparable ever since. Her ma and pa hadn't approved, of course. Not only was Jake from Hailbury, Leybourne's enemy from time immemorial, but he was from a poor family of farm workers. "You'll spend your life up to your elbows in pig shit if you marry that one," Pa had so eloquently said. Pa was a wheelwright and never out of work. "It takes real skill, my job," he'd say with pride. "Not anyone can do it, you know." He and Ma had always thought Annie would marry Pa's apprentice, a lanky, freckled lad called Mark Petherington, who watched Annie like a lovesick puppy. Her parents had pictured Mark taking over the business one day, Annie at his side, and a whole host of lanky, freckled children at their feet, no doubt. But when she met Jake, all thoughts of marriage to Mark Petherington flew from Annie's mind like bats from a belfry. She was in love, and no matter what her parents said, her mind was made up. They forbade her from marrying him, and, in the end, she had fled with Jake in the dead of night, and she hadn't seen them since. Annie had never looked back, despite their damp and draughty cottage, despite the ever-present pangs of hunger and holes in her boots. Despite all the hardship, she had a man who loved her and who made her laugh every single day. No, she had never regretted her decision. As she looked at the stolen gloves lying on the table, she hoped to God that Jake wouldn't regret his now. For it wasn't just her life that was at stake, it was his too. If she was caught, then Jake would find himself married to a criminal. He'd lose his job, and the whole village would shun him. She rose from her chair with a groan, unable to sit still, jittery as a crane fly and sick with fear. She had to get rid of the gloves before she was found with them. But how? She paced about the room as she thought, fingers drumming against her cheek. She could wait until nightfall and bury them deep in the woods, or burn them so that nothing but ash would remain to tell of her guilt. Or she could throw them into the river, tear them into tiny pieces and scatter them to the four winds. But what if she was caught trying to get rid of them? There'd be no getting out of that. With a sudden movement, Annie grabbed the gloves and shoved them inside her sewing box, covered the box with a blanket, and thrust it under the table. She sat, head in hands, eyes...